Hey everyone, and welcome back to another report. So, once again we have somber news to talk about today, with significant job losses once more hitting the games industry. Both ArenaNet, of course known for the Guild Wars franchise, and Fire Monkeys face extensive layoffs as their parent companies restructure, claiming to be restructuring themselves for the future, which at this stage does seem like somewhat of a euphemism for doubling down on mobile game content. I mean, seriously, some of the numbers we're going to get into in this video are pretty staggering. Thankfully, waiting a few days to cover this has given me more time to research it a bit more, so we actually have quite a lot to cover, and really some interesting data to sink our teeth into. So, in an email to ArenaNet employees, the NCSoft CEO said, "Our live game business revenue is declining as our franchises age. Delays in development on PC and mobile titles have further drained our revenue projects, while operating costs in the West have increased. Where we are is not sustainable and is not going to set us up for future success." Going on to say that this has required cost cutting across the organization, and that the restructuring, cost cutting, and strategic realignments are all being done to secure our tomorrow and to provide the foundation that will allow us to grow and acquire. Okay. On the face of it, that does seem quite similar to the Activision Blizzard situation. When you get into the numbers, well, it really is a bit different. It's quite interesting. Now, before we do that, let's take a look at ArenaNet. So, founded in the year 2000, ArenaNet's first release was the pretty damn famous Guild Wars in 2005. Later following that came up with expansion packs. Guild Wars 1 was not a game that I played, but from what I understand, it had a mostly instanced world and a massive focus on PvP, and a community that really loved PvP. Now, only 2 years later, they announced Guild Wars 2, which was quite mental, only 2 years after the original's release. Of course, Guild Wars 2 would release in 2012. Announcing that game 7 years before it would launch is pretty damn wild, but well, they were able to eventually cross the finishing line, with Guild Wars 2 successfully releasing in August of 2012. And I really think this is an important topic. They took a lot of flack for announcing the game so early on, but then once it came out, in some regards they actually took a lot more flack as well. Guild Wars 2 is seemingly designed for a different audience to those who played Guild Wars 1. It abandoned many of the Guild War 1 features, really attempting to create a less niche and more broad appeal game that I suppose is something that could take on World of Warcraft, which at the time was about to take a lot of flack for the theme of its Mists of Pandaria expansion. Now, after a disastrous, of course, back half to the Cataclysm expansion, many actually saw Guild Wars 2 as a potential WoW killer. But as NCSoft's other WoW killer, WildStar, would end up turning out, well, the WoW killers tend to not kill WoW, and of course Carbine sadly did close down, resulting in the loss of all jobs. Now, I bring this stuff up because we've also learned that ArenaNet had multiple unannounced projects in the works. Now, given how Guild Wars 2 was announced so early on, and how much flack they ended up taking for announcing it so early on, it seems to me that they were very cautious about announcing any of their in-progress projects. As for those, or what those things are, well, we just don't really know. And that does bring us to the recent situation. So after that email from the NCSoft CEO, co-founder Mike O'Brien confirmed the news to staff. We don't know all of what he had to say, but we do know that all impacted employees are getting 2 months of severance pay, with people getting an additional amount based on the time that they have spent with the company. Now, that does seem to be pretty reasonable. Ultimately, I do know that Activision Blizzard offered severance and job-seeking help, but that severance actually didn't extend to a lot of people based on them, say, being off contracts. And that actually includes some pretty well-known people like Alex Ackerman, who really helped to, say, get BlizzCon going for a few years. Now, we don't really know the specifics here, but it does seem like ArenaNet are taking care of their employees as best they can. Ultimately, though, this is a decision that will have been made, by the higher-ups at NCSoft. And I really do hope we get to see some of what those projects were. I don't think that their art translated that well into Guild Wars 2, but like just the concept art for that game is pretty damn stunning. And with almost 400 people being employed at the studio, it's quite clear that they will have had a significant number of employees working on other projects. And you know, that does make me wonder, perhaps by not announcing those projects, they ended up signing a bit of a death warrant, making NCSoft feel like they could axe those projects and therefore those team members without the public outcry of it also being attached to the cancellation cancellation of an anticipated title. Now, here's the thing. This story gets far, far more interesting when we look into the NCSoft financial history over the last 10 years. That sounds really boring, but don't worry, I've done all the, boring stuff. Now I've just got the interesting stuff for you, especially with mobile. And this stuff's really, really major. So, NCSoft is a Korean company. Their largest title, of course, is Lineage 1, and it still makes a crazy amount of money, even to this very day, over 20 years after its 1998 release. Now, it's mainly a thing in Korea, and its performance really has just been the basis for NCSoft's financial stability. But still, they've wanted to move past that, and that has involved a few different things. First, Lineage 2. Lineage 2 does okay, but it's nowhere near the success of, its predecessor. We then have Aeon. As you can see in this graph, it has been a strong but not massive performer for really quite a long time. Initially only, of course, being a Korean launch, it eventually did get a Western release, which you can see that big revenue spike for. And I actually played that game on launch, but I, of course, ended up going back to WoW, as most of us ended up doing. Aeon would continue to, tail off in the West, but do pretty decently in Korea, but nowhere near to the degree of Lineage 1. Then Blade & Souls was announced in 2007, actually quite close to Guild Wars 2, and it was supposed to bring, martial arts into the MMO genre, with both it and Guild Wars 2 actually being pegged for release on the PlayStation 3. Suffice to say, that did not happen. Now, Guild Wars 2 eventually did come out in 2012, as did Blade & Soul, but only in Korea. And once again, you see that big, juicy revenue spike for them. Now, as we continue through the life of Guild Wars 2, it's really apparent that that game launched quite massively, but you really can see that revenue fall off pretty quickly, with it just sliding over the next few years until its Heart of Thorns expansion, which itself did pretty decently, but what's really telling is it only seems to have served existing players, because as only 2 quarters after the release, Guild Wars 2 was at a record low amount of income, with that staying low right up until the next expansion, often making similar money to Aeon, and consistently making less money than Blade & Soul, even though at the time, that was only in Korea. Now, since Blade & Soul released in the West, it has earned far more money than Guild Wars 2, even, as I said before, it's a Western launch. We then have NCSoft's other WoW killer, WildStar, and the numbers for this one are honestly just a bit sad. It brought in 29,048 million won at launch, which was barely higher than Guild Wars 2 that quarter, and that wasn't the most exciting quarter for Guild Wars 2 ever. From then, the revenue just went down a bit the next quarter, but then it went down by 2/3, and then it went down by half, and then it slowly dwindled to the point where it was bringing in 1/15 of Guild Wars 2's revenue, and after that they started counting it as other in their earnings, and basically other is the executioner's waiting room. WildStar, of course, ended up dying along with Carbine, the company, and while those job losses are really sad, in this case I think it is a case of the product not performing well and maybe not a big corporate evil, even though that said, once you actually delve into why WildStar went down, you could make the case that NCSoft, maybe they didn't give Carbine enough money, and maybe NCSoft basically sealed the deal for them. So I think further investigation is needed for WildStar. So looking through all this, right, we're averaging quarterly profits of 85,000 million won. So imagine the look on my face when I look at Q3 2017 and they make a staggering 333,000 million won with some 551,000 million won of sales. What did that? Lineage M, a mobile translation of Lineage. The launch quarter sales for that totaled the entire history of Guild Wars 2, which is just mind-boggling. Now, as we see the quarters roll on, we do actually see profits fall with declining sales across all of their titles, even the mobile stuff. Now, is that declining to the point of being a massive problem, though? To the point where people at ArenaNet would need to go? It's really hard to tell. So their CEO said they needed to change, to shift their focus, and that their live game businesses were declining as their franchises were aging, saying that they had delays in development of both mobile and PC titles, with Western costs having increased. Well, I'm assuming that of all their studios, they probably looked at ArenaNet. They probably looked at the output of ArenaNet in terms of content. They probably saw there were multiple delayed or failed projects. Perhaps those projects were not on mobile, and mobile likely is where these companies want to go. Guild Wars 2 launched 2 expansions since 2012, with both of them being smaller than what you would get in a WoW expansion, and, with their Living World seasons delivering drip-fed, content, albeit not that much of it, it just doesn't seem like that game's had a massive quantity of support. I mean, in the same period of time, Blizz released Warlords of Draenor, Legion, and BFA, and do tend to have beefier patches. And of course, that all involves a sub fee. But still, when you look at the overall profit, it's kind of hard to, see it as being something that was about to kill the company and being a massive pressing concern. And it does just make me wonder if they were worried about their future, decided they needed to cut costs ahead of that, and with the lower revenue of Guild Wars 2 and slow development of their other projects, decided that of all the people they had, ArenaNet were the ones on the chopping block. Still, as much as it's, fun to talk about numbers, I guess, the real thing here is really sad. There's a lot of job losses. From what we know, they're it's quite a large extent, and it seems like a lot of the teams who were on those in-progress projects are probably going to go. It's tricky. Do ArenaNet have a next big thing now? Does this mark the beginning of the end for ArenaNet? It very well could be. Guild Wars 2 seems to be safe for now, with the company posting that they are going to be fully supporting the game with another season of Living World to come, but what happens after that? It's tricky. Likely NCSoft saw they were putting money into a bunch of what were probably in-progress PC games, and then they looked at that big, fat sales bar for mobile and decided that's where they need to go. Personally, I do feel a bit of despair here, to be honest with you. MTX-focused mobile is just so good at hacking people's brains. They might be free to play, but man, the cost of playing those games is a lot more than just buying a game. I'd love to see what the average, revenue, or, sort of spend per player is. Lineage M is doing really well. Lineage 2M is in the works. And of course, you've probably had Lineage 2 Revolution, just licensed to Netmarble, just advertised at you extremely over the last year and a half or 2 years. And it's tricky for us. Core gamers tend to not really like these games. I certainly don't like them. They don't represent a future gaming landscape that I'm interested in. Yet, as I said, it's that brain hacking, they're so powerful in their monetization. They just produce the numbers that fill the spreadsheets that decisions are made with. And the sad thing is we could all boycott these games. We could not touch them at all. And we probably would not be noticeable on that damn spreadsheet. I really do think the mobile market it's massive and it's different in many ways to the core PC gaming market. The problem is it's so large it could really be driving development, and I don't know what we can do other than to look towards indies who are probably going to be more focused on making games for us first as an audience. Now, as for other things, why Guild Wars 2 maybe hasn't done super well, I guess they abandoned a lot of the PvP uniqueness of Guild Wars 1. Personally, I found that World v World v World was just a bit of a big boring zerg, and there's just a lot of features that a lot of the core Guild Wars 1 people really loved that 2 didn't. Now, 2 I thought was very accessible. You could really hop in and play. You could go in many places in the world, and it was all very good for that, but I never really found that hook, right? That one thing that would absolutely get me wanting to come back all the time. And it felt like there was never enough content being sort of thrown into the game to really make me super excited, even though it's a game that has, say, its mastery system, which I commend, and its mount system, which again, I commend, and I think they're both things that World of Warcraft could wholesale lift and do better, for doing so. But yeah, it just seems like Guild Wars 2, it's a low-level success. It's a game that people can dip into and out of quite a bit, but it just doesn't seem to have that massive die-hard audience that maybe Guild Wars 1 was able to have. Now, unfortunately, we do have some more layoffs that I want to cover here. These are at Fire Monkeys. Initially, it was reported to be between 80 and 100, but I believe it's now down to 40 to 50. But according to a local industry body, this is actually 5% of the Australian sector being laid off. As for why, well, EA Games said they were shifting towards mobile live services, and with Fire Monkeys now running The Sims Mobile, it seems like they are a studio that mostly exists to maintain those games. It does make you wonder about the feasibility of many companies, I suppose. They're all trimming fat, but with so many eggs in one basket, they open themselves up to significant risk. Now, NCSoft, they for a long time were decently diversified with multiple titles, and I'm really thinking of companies like, say, the Activision wing of Activision Blizzard. They don't have much past Call of Duty, and that means if Call of Duty one year does 25% less, that's going to be really tricky. And if they expand their workforce to account for Call of Duty always doing really well, then the second Call of Duty doesn't do really well, big job losses. And that really is worrying, and it's one of those things that does just call into question, to what degree should you hire? Is it irresponsible to hire too many people when things are going good? I would actually say it probably is at times. But there you go, sad news, and you know what, a bit of a dismal look at the future when it comes to mobile. At the end of the day, when Lineage can make in 1 month the mobile version, when it can make in 1 month what, like, years of Guild Wars 2, including its launch, were able to make, it's hard to argue with the business people making those decisions. But then it just comes to the trouble where what those business people want is not necessarily in alignment with the things we enjoy playing in our downtime. And that's a tricky position for us. I don't know. Thank you very much for watching this video. Let me know what you think about the topics discussed down below. And with that, I will see you next time.